Welcome to Moonlight Audiobook. I'm Julian, your host for today's mystery. In this video, we enter a world of elegance, secrets, and shadows. Let me know in the comments where in the world you are tuning in from. Grab a warm drink, dim the lights, and settle into your favorite chair, because we're about to begin a mystery unlike any other. This is Hercule Poirot, Murder in the Gilded Salon, a tale of poisoned champagne, hidden pasts, and a glittering evening that turned deadly. But remember, in a room full of high society charm, someone is hiding a murderous truth. And only one man, with the finest mustache and the sharpest little grey cells, can uncover it. So if you love a well-twisted tale and brilliant deduction, make sure you're subscribed, and let's dive into the mystery together. Chapter 1. Death Among Damask Drapes. On a summer evening in 1937, the Langston townhouse stood like a gilded jewel in the heart of Mayfair, its windows aglow with candlelight and the muffled chords of a piano drifting onto the quiet street below. Inside, the Gilded Salon lived up to its name, a sumptuous chamber of mirrors and silk damask, where golden sconces flickered against lacquered surfaces and laughter rose like bubbles from a glass of Veuve Clicquot. The hostess, Lady Eugenia Langston, presided over the scene like a queen without a crown. She was a woman of formidable bearing and sculpted grace, widowed these 10 years and whispered about for twice as long. Her salons were as infamous as they were exclusive, part performance, part provocation, and always attended by the brightest, boldest, and most unpredictable members of London society. This evening was no exception. The guest list had been curated with surgical precision. Felix Montrose, once London's darling dramatist, stood near the fireplace, drink in hand, offering acidic commentary on the flower arrangements. Across from him lounged Cecily Frobisher, heiress to a vast cotton fortune and possessed of a temperament as dry as the champagne. Dominic Carville, young, careless, and impossibly wealthy, hovered at the buffet, his arm looped around Odette Vale, a pale-eyed beauty with a dancer's poise and a smile full of shadows. The American couple, Barton and Helen Keane, circled the room like polite satellites, their Chicago accents barely softened for English ears. Near the pianoforte stood Lady Langston's latest companion, Dr. Emery Ashcroft, tall, lean, and cold as polished marble. He spoke rarely, and when he did, people listened more to what he withheld than what he said. As the hour drew toward 9, anticipation rippled through the air. Tonight's highlight was no idle parlor game. Giancarlo Bellini, the famously temperamental composer, would premiere a new work, Lament in C minor, commissioned specifically for Lady Langston. Rumor held that the piece had been inspired by a doomed affair, though with whom, no one could say. It was precisely the sort of ambiguity Eugenia Langston adored. But at precisely 9:17 p.m., just as the first mournful notes unfurled into the perfumed air, a scream shattered the harmony. Sharp, sudden, and unrestrained, it rang out from the adjoining drawing room, the private retreat Lady Langston reserved for intimate conversations and calculated confidences. A wave of startled gasps swept the room. Chairs scraped, flutes clinked. In a rush of satin and scandal, the guests crowded to the threshold. The door to the drawing room stood ajar. Inside, amidst ivory-paneled walls and tasteful Regency furnishings, Lady Langston sat motionless in a Louis XVI chair. Her head lolled to the side, framed by the halo of a silk lampshade. One hand rested lightly in her lap, the other hung limp at her side. Her eyes were open, glassy, fixed on nothing. She was, unmistakably, dead. A glass tumbler sat on the nearby table, half filled with amber liquid, a faint cloudiness rising within. A slice of lemon floated inertly on the surface. A single gold hairpin, identical to the ones she wore so religiously, lay on the carpet beneath her chair. No blood, No signs of struggle. Just a figure of elegance, abruptly silenced. Odette Vale was the first to speak, though her voice was barely above a breath. She didn't drink brandy with lemon, she said. She hated citrus. She said it clashed with her perfume. The silence that followed was thick with implication. By 10 o'clock, a constable had arrived and sealed the exits. No one was to leave the house. Statements were taken, tea was served. But the tea did nothing to warm the sudden chill that had settled over the Gilded Salon. Dr. Ashcroft, composed and clinical, confirmed what many already suspected. Lady Langston had not died of natural causes. Poison was possible, likely, even. A fast-acting agent, subtle and precise. The sort of thing that left no bruises, no cries, no mess. And so the guests remained, trapped in their evening finery, their social masks slipping, their eyes darting. At precisely 11:15, the heavy knock came at the door. The butler answered it with quiet efficiency, and in stepped a man known not only in London but in Paris, Brussels, New York, and Cairo. He was small in stature, impeccably dressed, with patent leather shoes that glinted like obsidian and a grey suit tailored within an inch of its life. His head was egg-shaped, his mustache, a work of architectural brilliance, curved with mathematical precision. He removed his gloves with careful deliberation and placed them into his breast pocket. "I am Hercule Poirot," he said, eyes narrowing slightly as he surveyed the room. "You have requested my presence. Bon. No one is to leave, Essillinois Vausplat." The constable stood aside without objection. The air seemed to shift around Poirot as he moved, not forcefully, but with a quiet gravity that demanded notice. He paused before the drawing-room door and glanced inside, his expression unreadable. He said nothing at first. Then, turning back to the gathered assembly, he gestured lightly. "I will speak to each of you in turn," he announced. "You will answer my questions with honesty and precision. Half-truths and hesitation, they will only delay us." He pointed gently toward Odette Vale. "Mademoiselle," he said, "you spoke first. What made you so certain it was the drink?" She flinched slightly. I noticed the lemon. And the smell. She always wore ambergris, very warm. Lemon would ruin it. She would never have touched it. Never." Poirot inclined his head. "Interesting. You knew her well." Odette hesitated. "Not intimately. But we talked. She confided in me, sometimes." A faint crease formed between Poirot's brows. "Confided? About what?" Her lips parted, then closed. Her guests. Her suspicions. She liked to speculate. Poirot said nothing, merely turned his gaze toward Dr. Ashcroft. "You examined the body, did you not, monsieur?" The doctor nodded once. "Yes, I am a physician." "Bien, sir. And your opinion?" "No physical trauma. No external injuries. Her breathing had ceased before I arrived. If it was poison, it acted very quickly." "You did not attempt resuscitation?" Ashcroft's voice did not waver. "It would have been futile." Poirot clasped his hands behind his back and walked slowly to the glass tumbler on the side table. He did not touch it. He merely looked. Then he turned to the room. "This was not a death by mischance," he said softly. "No accident, no sudden illness. This was orchestration. Someone planned it. Someone here." A ripple ran through the guests. Poirot's voice remained calm, but unyielding. "Let us begin, Miss Amos. The truth, it is here. It only waits to be seen." Chapter 2. Whispers Among Crystals. The storm of whispers had begun to settle by the time Poirot requested the drawing room be cleared. The body of Lady Langston had been respectfully veiled and left undisturbed pending official examination. Until the police arrived with formal authority, Poirot moved with unspoken command, his reputation alone enough to grant him the reins of the evening. The guests were directed back into the Gilded Salon, now a room transformed. No longer did it pulse with the gaiety of champagne and gossip. The laughter had curdled into suspicion. Every pair of eyes scanned the others, some with uncertainty, others with calculation. Poirot noted it all. The chairs were rearranged into a wide semicircle, as if awaiting a séance. The heavy curtains had been drawn closed. A single chandelier hung above like a frozen constellation, casting soft light over strained expressions. Poirot stood before them, hands clasped lightly, the picture of composure. "Let us begin," he said. "We are, as the English say, all in the same boat." The death of Lady Langston was no accident, and the means of that death, if my eyes do not deceive me, was poison. A crime committed in silence and in company. Someone here administered it. Someone here watched her die. A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. Poirot nodded gently. "Oh, it is not pleasant to hear. But until I understand the truth, none shall leave. I will speak to each of you, alone and without interruption. There is nothing to fear for the innocent. But those who lie, they will find I do not miss even the smallest wrinkle in the cloth." He turned to the butler, who stood solemnly by the doorway. "Tea for the guests, if you please. And I will begin in the morning room, one by one." The butler bowed and withdrew. Poirot gestured toward the pianist, who had remained silent throughout. "Monsieur Bellini, would you be so kind?" The Italian composer rose reluctantly. Slender, with prematurely silvered hair and a demeanor that radiated bruised pride, Giancarlo Bellini followed Poirot to the morning room, closing the door softly behind him. The interviews began. Inside the morning room, Poirot sat on the edge of a brocade armchair, notebook balanced on his knee. Bellini perched opposite, his fingers twitching slightly, as though still caught in the last phrases of his unfinished lament. "You were to perform tonight, monsieur," Poirot began. "Your composition was dedicated to Lady Langston." Bellini nodded once. "Commissioned by her. Paid in advance." "And you knew her well?" "Well enough," he said curtly. "She was flattering. A patroness. She liked to be close to art. Not necessarily artists." "Was there affection?" Bellini's mouth twitched. "Not from me." Poirot tilted his head. "But from her?" "She hinted. She played. She collected men like others collect statues." "Did you resent her?" "I resented many things. But I do not poison my patrons, Monsieur Poirot. Not even the cruel ones." Poirot made a small note. "And where were you when she was found?" Bellini looked irritated. "By the piano, playing the lament. As requested." Poirot met his eyes. "A fitting title, perhaps." "Thank you, monsieur. Send in Mademoiselle Odette Vale, if you please." Odette entered moments later, porcelain pale against her pale blue gown, the color of faded ice. Her hands trembled faintly as she sat, clutching a silk handkerchief. Poirot studied her without speaking for several seconds. "You were the first to suggest poison," he said at last. "Yes," she replied softly. "It seemed obvious." "Tell me, mademoiselle, how long have you been acquainted with Lady Langston?" "Only this past season. We met at a recital in Belgravia. She was very kind to me." "Kind?" Poirot lifted a brow. Many found her sharp-tongued. Odette hesitated. "I think she enjoyed control. But she could be generous. She lent me this dress, actually. Said I looked too pale in green." Poirot glanced at the gown, noting the detail. And your fiancé, Monsieur Carville, was he close with her? A pause. Dominic admires older women, she said delicately. Lady Langston fascinated him. And did that trouble you? Should it have? Poirot did not reply. Where were you when the scream was heard? At the buffet. I was speaking with Mrs. Keene. About the orchids. You did not enter the drawing room. No. I couldn't bear to look. Poirot studied her expression. Fear or guilt? Her gaze sharpened. I loved her, Monsieur Poirot. Not in the way you may assume, but as a figure. An ideal. And ideals do not die easily. Poirot made a note. Merci, mademoiselle. Please send in Mr. Carville. Dominic Carville entered with an awkward mix of defiance and detachment. He was handsome in the way of idle sons, dark hair, bored eyes, and the kind of careless confidence that masked inexperience. So you're the famous Belgian, are you? He said, dropping into the chair with the air of one humoring a fuss. Poirot smiled thinly. And you, monsieur, are the heir to Carville lines. In a sense. Father's not dead yet. You were fond of Lady Langston. Carville shrugged. She was amusing, intelligent. She knew how to throw a party. And she admired you. Possibly. I don't mind being admired. Poirot steepled his fingers. Admiration can be dangerous, monsieur. It makes people believe they are owed something in return. Carville smirked. If you're asking whether I had a thing with her, the answer is no. Though she might have hoped otherwise. And how did Mademoiselle Vale respond to that attention? He snorted. Odette's jealous of every shadow. But no, nothing happened. We were just friends. Were you with her the whole evening? Most of it. I stepped out for a cigarette at one point. Came back. Heard the scream. Chaos. Very well, Poirot said. I shall speak to the Keenes now. The American couple entered together, as if reluctant to part even briefly. Helen Keene was short, sharp-eyed, and briskly polite. Her husband, Barton, was heavy-set and red-faced, with the unease of a man unsure where the social minefields lay. Forgive us, Helen began. We barely knew the lady. But you attended her salon, Poirot replied. You were not strangers. She was fascinated by Americans, said Barton. Thought we were uncouth, but in an entertaining way. And did she confide in you? Poirot asked. Helen shook her head. Not us. But we saw her speak quietly with that doctor fellow, Ashcroft, more than once. Poirot noted this. And where were you when the scream occurred? Near the buffet, Helen replied. Speaking with the young woman, Miss Vale. Poirot nodded slowly. Merci. That will be all. Send in Dr. Ashcroft. Dr. Emery Ashcroft entered last. His presence seemed to cool the room by several degrees. He sat with precise movements, folding his hands in his lap. You examined the body, Poirot began. A swift diagnosis. Ashcroft's voice was calm. I am a physician. She was clearly dead. I saw no need to create a scene. You spoke with her before the concert. I did. And the nature of that conversation? Ashcroft paused. She asked me about the effects of digitalis on the human heart. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A curious topic for casual conversation. Indeed. And you answered her. I told her it could be fatal. In specific doses. Poirot stood. You understand, monsieur, what this implies. Ashcroft met his gaze without blinking. Of course. Poirot nodded. That will be all. Back in the Gilded Salon, Poirot resumed his place before the gathered group. He looked out at the assembled faces, eager, pale, and tight with unspoken fears. "There is much to consider," he said quietly. "But already, certain threads begin to pull free." He glanced toward the piano. Bellini's sheet music still rested on the stand, the final line left unfinished. "Lady Langston once said that every performance reveals a truth," Poirot murmured. Perhaps tonight's truth was written long before the first note was ever played. Chapter 3. Patterns in the Silk. The dawn that broke over Mayfair the following morning was pale and indifferent, a soft grey light creeping through the tall windows of the Langston townhouse. The Gilded Salon lay quiet now, stripped of its evening glamour, the velvet cushions slightly askew, a champagne glass still perched on a mantel like a forgotten relic of decadence. The only presence moving through the space was Hercule Poirot. He walked in measured silence, observing without touching. A faint scuff on the parquet floor, a smear of moisture on the rim of the abandoned brandy glass. The faintest imprint of a ring or bracelet on the armrest where Lady Langston had reclined. All curious, yes, but not definitive. Poirot had long since ceased to place blind faith in physical clues. It was human behavior, words, omissions, contradictions, that painted the real portrait of guilt. At precisely 7:30, Poirot convened in the breakfast room with a pot of black coffee, his moustache immaculately groomed, his gaze sharp as ever. Across from him sat Inspector Horace Sharp of Scotland Yard, freshly arrived and visibly skeptical. "You've kept them overnight?" Sharp asked, glancing through the file Poirot had prepared. "They are in no great discomfort, mon ami," Poirot replied. "A little inconvenience will encourage truthfulness." Sharp sighed. "Any clear suspect?" "No," Poirot said thoughtfully, "but many motives, and one interesting contradiction." Sharp raised a brow. "Which is?" Poirot leaned back slightly. Several of the guests claimed to have been near the buffet when the scream was heard. Yet the buffet room is not large. They cannot all have been there. Either memory has played a trick, or someone lies. Sharp grunted. "Any evidence of how she was poisoned?" "That is your domain," Poirot said mildly. "Though I suspect the drink was tampered with while Lady Langston was briefly alone before the recital. She dismissed her maid shortly after 8:45. At 9:10, she entered the private drawing room. Within 7 minutes, dead. Fast acting, then, Sharp said, flipping pages. "And this, Dr. Ashcroft." Poirot nodded. "He is precise, reserved, and claims Lady Langston asked him about digitalis in casual conversation. An odd topic, but not impossible." Sharp muttered, "Still no confession." Poirot gave a small smile. "No, my friend. But now comes the part one enjoy best, the pattern. Every killer weaves a tapestry of logic, but often there is a single broken thread. We must find it." He stood and straightened his cuffs. "Now, I shall ask a few more questions. Quietly, without the theatrics of a formal interrogation. A word placed here, a nudge there. We shall see who blinks." He began with Helen Keene. She was already seated near the grand piano when he approached, her morning attire impeccable, her lips pressed into a fine line. "You slept well, madam?" he asked gently. "As well as one can after a murder," she replied. Poirot nodded. "Your husband? He has gone for a walk." "He needed air." Poirot glanced at the empty music stand. "You said last night you observed Lady Langston speaking privately with Dr. Ashcroft." "Yes, twice. Once in the garden a week ago, and again just before guests arrived last evening. Her tone was pointed, as if giving instructions." "Interesting. You are a good observer." "I am American," Helen said crisply. We're trained to notice when we're being watched. Poirot smiled faintly. And what did you think of the others? Mademoiselle Vale, perhaps. Helen hesitated. Insecure, but not stupid. There's something very controlled beneath all that fragility. Ah, controlled people are dangerous, n'est-ce pas? If they snap, yes. Poirot inclined his head. Merci, madame. His next conversation was unplanned. Giancarlo Bellini had wandered into the empty drawing-room, his coat slung over one shoulder, cigarette unlit between his fingers. He turned at the sound of Poirot's footsteps. She sat there, the composer said quietly, smiling one moment, gone the next. You were fond of her? Poirot asked. Bellini shrugged. I admired her, but she mocked what she adored. A dangerous habit. Poirot said nothing for a moment. Then, you have not asked about your composition. Whether it will be performed. Bellini gave a bitter laugh. Its premiere ended with a corpse. I suspect it has served its purpose. Poirot looked toward the silent keys of the piano. Music reveals character. Did you choose a lament or a confession? Bellini did not answer. At noon, Poirot asked Dominic Carville to join him in the library. The young man arrived with bloodshot eyes and the disheveled elegance of one who had not slept. You are troubled, monsieur, Poirot observed. Of course I'm troubled, Carville snapped. A woman's dead. Poirot gestured to a chair. Let us speak plainly. You had a flirtation with Lady Langston, no? Carville stiffened. Flirtation? Maybe. She enjoyed the game. But it was harmless. Was it? Carville looked away. She invited me here without Odette. Twice. I didn't go. Why not? Because I knew she'd twist it. She liked power plays. I was just a piece. Poirot folded his arms. And Odette, did she know? I told her. Eventually. Poirot's voice softened. Might she have acted out of jealousy? Carville's laugh was short and bitter. Odette wouldn't dirty her gloves. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Do not mistake delicacy for innocence. Carville stood abruptly. Are we done? For now. Shortly after, Poirot spoke to Cecily Frobisher, who had remained aloof throughout the proceedings. She had taken up her morning in Lady Langston's rose garden, pruning the petals with a pair of borrowed shears. Unusual, Poirot remarked, to tend flowers in a stranger's garden. Eugenia and I were old acquaintances, Cecily replied, snipping precisely. She hated these roses. I told her they were vulgar. She kept them just to irritate me. Poirot gave a small nod. You were rivals. Something like that. And you attended out of politeness. Curiosity. She was becoming sloppy, you know, inviting failed artists, Americans, even younger women she barely knew. It wasn't like her. Poirot watched the blade of the shears glint in the sun. You are observant. I'm old enough to see when a queen is falling. Did she know you saw it? Oh yes, that was our understanding. Poirot watched her a moment longer. Merci, madame. By mid-afternoon, Poirot stood once more in the Gilded Salon, alone again. He reviewed the statements, matching tone to word, action to claim. A pattern was beginning to form, slight but present. Helen Keane had offered sharp observations but kept herself at a strategic distance. Bellini's pride had been bruised, but his rage was musical, not murderous. Dominic was self-absorbed, careless, but too nervous to orchestrate poison. Cecily Frobisher had motive, rivalry, bitterness, but no opportunity that could yet be proven. And Odette Vale. Yes, There was something about Odette. Not simply her sorrow, but its placement. Her readiness to suggest poison. Her peculiar calm when others had descended into panic. Her assertion that Lady Langston would never drink lemon, when such a detail would require intimate knowledge of habit. Poirot tapped his finger lightly against the edge of a gilt frame. Something Odette said still rang in his ears. She lent me this dress. Said I looked too pale in green. A gift, or a manipulation? A token of friendship, or a calculated gesture to make the younger woman feel indebted, even owned? Was it possible the dress, the compliments, the entire performance, had been part of a cruel little theatre? And if so, had it turned too far? He turned sharply as footsteps approached. The butler bowed. Inspector Sharp asks if you are ready for the next stage, sir. Poirot adjusted his cufflinks, and the faintest smile touched his lips. Tell him, yes. Hercule Poirot is always ready. Chapter 4. Portraits of the Damned. The drawing-room had changed in mood entirely. Where once it echoed with the pleasant murmur of cultured voices and the clinking of crystal, now it simmered with tension, hushed tones, and darting glances. The grand chandelier above flickered slightly, as if even the light itself had grown uneasy under the burden of suspicion. Poirot, seated in an armchair that offered him a view of every face in the room, observed in absolute silence. His fingertips met gently in front of him, the glint in his eyes veiled behind lowered lashes. Every movement, every murmur, was a brushstroke in the painting of guilt he was gradually composing. Madame Langston's death, Inspector Grange had declared earlier, was not natural. His voice had fallen like a stone into still water, sending waves across every soul present. Grange stood now near the fireplace, notebook in hand, though it was clear who would be conducting the real investigation. The presence of Hercule Poirot had an almost spiritual authority about it. Few could meet his gaze for more than a moment. One by one, the guests were invited into the adjoining study, an elegant room of heavy drapery and polished walnut, where Poirot would speak with them alone. It was his preferred setting for such delicate conversations, intimate, quiet, and psychological in its arrangement. The first to enter was Lord Alton Langston, the bereaved husband. He carried himself with aristocratic stiffness, but beneath the polished exterior, Poirot noted the ghost of some agitation, perhaps grief, or something more self-protective. I hardly know what to say, Langston murmured, lowering himself into the armchair across from Poirot. It's all too sudden. You were not with your wife when she collapsed, Poirot said gently. Where were you at that precise moment? Langston hesitated, brushing a speck of lint from his cuff. I was speaking to Major Frobisher in the garden. We'd stepped out for some air. Poirot tilted his head. The garden. Cold air. You were not smoking, perhaps. No, nothing of the sort. You and Major Frobisher were old friends. Acquaintances, he corrected. We've met through club events and mutual causes. Poirot nodded slowly. Forgive the bluntness, my lord, but I understand your marriage to Lady Langston was not harmonious. The question struck a nerve. Langston's mouth set in a thin line. We had our differences. Yes, she had a temper. But to suggest, what exactly are you implying? Nothing at all, for the moment, Poirot said politely. Only that the emotional climate of a household is important, n'est-ce pas? Langston rose with the stiffness of wounded pride. If there's nothing else, I believe I'll rejoin the others. Poirot bowed his head. Merci, my lord. That is all, for now. Next came Major Gilbert Frobisher, a man built like a cannonball, broad-chested and red-faced, with a moustache that could rival Poirot's, though not in elegance. He sat with the discomfort of a man more used to giving orders than receiving scrutiny. You and Lord Langston were in the garden during the incident? Poirot asked. Yes. Poor timing, evidently. Were you discussing business or pleasure? Neither. Politics, if you must know. Langston's got foolish ideas about tariffs. Poirot smiled faintly. And Lady Langston, did you know her well? Well enough to know she was formidable. The type to remember a snub for a decade. You liked her? Frobisher shifted. Didn't dislike her. But she could be difficult. Ah, said Poirot quietly. And what did she think of you? The Major gave a short laugh. That I was brutish, probably. She said as much once at a dinner. Poirot noted the flicker of something behind the bravado. Resentment, perhaps, or suppressed embarrassment. You were not the only one she had crossed swords with, it seems. I suppose not, Frobisher said. But I didn't kill her, if that's what you're digging for. Poirot merely inclined his head. Merci, Major. Third to enter was Miss Daphne Wren, Lady Langston's companion and secretary. Her presence was like a wisp of fog, pale, ethereal, and easy to overlook. She sat demurely on the edge of the chair, hands folded in her lap, eyes lowered. You were quite close to Lady Langston, Poirot began. I worked for her. I admired her greatly. Admiration is not always without complexity. Did she treat you well? Miss Wren looked up, surprise flashing in her soft brown eyes. She was demanding, but brilliant. I learned much under her. And yet, such brilliance can cast a long shadow. Was there ever tension between you? She hesitated. She didn't trust easily. She had episodes. Paranoia, sometimes. I often had to calm her. Poirot leaned forward. And on the evening of her death. I was at her side when she took the drink, Miss Wren whispered. She dismissed me just after. I was outside the room when it happened. Did you see anyone else enter? No, but I heard voices down the hall. Voices? Poirot asked, sharply. Yes, raised ones. I think it was Miss Tremaine and Mr. Hargrove arguing. Poirot's eyes glinted. Merci, mademoiselle. Julian Hargrove, the critic, came next. Tall, sardonic, and disheveled, he carried the air of a man used to disliking things. He flopped into the chair as if being interrogated was just another tiresome appointment. You and Miss Tremaine were heard quarreling, Poirot said. True. She objected to my review of her last performance. I objected to her objecting. Poirot steepled his fingers. Were you in love with her? Hargrove scoffed. Good heavens, no. But you had dined alone with Lady Langston the evening prior, did you not? He blinked. How did you? Poirot allowed himself a brief smile. Mon ami, I do not miss details. Yes, Hargrove admitted. She invited me to discuss a possible biography. She wanted her legacy managed by someone with insight. And you felt honored. I felt intrigued. She was a woman of contradictions. Indeed, said Poirot softly. Merci, monsieur. Last was Miss Serena Tremaine, luminous and severe. Her green gown shimmered like envy in fabric. She entered with the poise of a woman used to performance, even in grief. You quarreled with Mr. Hargrove. I did. He insulted my art. Were you fond of Lady Langston? She was a patron of mine. I owed her, professionally. Only professionally. Miss Tremaine hesitated. She could be cruel. I don't deny it. But she was also generous. Complex. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And you were not in the salon when she collapsed? No. I was upstairs, Changing. Changing. For the musical. I wanted to look presentable. Poirot noted the delay. Did you see anyone on the stairs? No, she replied. Only shadows. Chapter 5. The Silver Locket and the Scandal. The morning after the fatal soirée broke cold and unforgiving. London's skyline was a smear of grey and silver, its rooftops dusted with frost as though the city itself had entered mourning. At number 67, Belgrave Square, a black-draped constable now stood discreetly by the gate, the Langston name carrying just enough aristocratic weight to attract interest but demand discretion. Inside, the household stirred with reluctance. Breakfasts were left half-touched, doors opened and closed with tentative care, and hushed voices whispered behind silk-paneled walls. The grand chandelier in the drawing-room hung still, its light catching the faint swirl of dust in the winter sun. Poirot, ever immaculate, had taken tea in the morning room, a quiet chamber off the main hallway. He sat alone, cup poised between fingers, lost in reflection. His gaze was turned toward a collection of portraits on the wall, noble ancestors glaring down with an authority they no longer possessed. It was not the grandeur of the house that impressed Poirot. It was the layers of secrecy that clung to its occupants. Presently, a polite knock drew him from thought. The door opened, and Chief Inspector Grange stepped in, trench coat slung over his arm, and a tired scowl deepening the lines around his mouth. "Morning, Monsieur Poirot." "Bon matin, Inspector. Come, warm yourself. There is Earl Grey, and also answers, perhaps." Grange poured himself a cup, glancing over the rim. "You found something, then?" "I have found many things, mon ami. The difficulty lies in distinguishing what is significant from what merely pretends to be." He placed his cup down and stood. "Let us take a walk through the house, shall we? I wish to revisit the scene." The salon had been restored to a cold orderliness. The spilled champagne was gone, the musicians dismissed, and only a faint scent of orange blossom liqueur lingered, faint and haunting. Poirot moved to the small sideboard where the glasses had been prepared. "She took her final drink from this table," he said. "And yet, no one saw who poured it." "Poison?" Grange asked. Poirot nodded. "Yes, a swift-acting substance. Tasteless, or nearly. But the exact compound, that will come from the coroner. We must concern ourselves with opportunity and intent." He paused, crouched, and inspected the edge of the sideboard. "Note the arrangement. 3 glasses to the left, 1 apart on the right. Almost as if one had been deliberately set apart. You think her glass was prepped separately? I think someone wished it to appear casually taken, but with just enough care to avoid suspicion." They walked back toward the hallway, Poirot pausing beneath the curving staircase. "You see, Inspector," he murmured, "the killer must be someone who had access to her, and to the drink, but also someone who would not immediately draw suspicion. One does not poison an aristocrat in full view without calculation." Grange looked thoughtful. "The companion? The secretary girl? She is timid, yes, but do not mistake gentleness for guilt. She was devoted. I sensed no bitterness. There was fear, yes, but not the kind that comes from murder." They turned down the corridor, heading toward the study where Poirot had conducted his interviews. The quiet of the house grew heavier as they walked. "Then who?" Grange asked. "Langston. Possible. He had motive, financial strain, an unhappy marriage. But too obvious. And his alibi, though weak, is supported. Frobisher." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, Le Major. Proud, puffed, bruised by insult. Capable of anger, yes. But is he capable of subtle murder? Unclear. They entered the study, now empty save for a fire crackling in the grate. Poirot went to the window, his gaze drawn across the garden. The winter leaves rustled faintly. "Non," he said at last. "There is something else. A pattern, a contradiction, perhaps." Then, almost to himself, the lady was hated by many. But who hated her enough? The breakthrough came not from deduction, but from absence. Late that afternoon, Poirot was perusing the household's visitor logbook, kept meticulously by the butler, Wilkins. Dates, names, and times, all recorded in looping cursive, a testament to the rhythms of upper-crust London life. Poirot paused on an entry from 3 days prior. Julian Hargrove, 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. He frowned. That same evening, Lady Langston had made reference during her dinner with Hargrove to a new commission. A biography, a project not previously discussed. And yet, no further meetings were recorded. No notes in her correspondence. Nothing in her diary except a single cryptic line, "J.H., not to be trusted. Remember Venice." Venice? Poirot turned the page back. 2 months ago, Serena Tremaine visited at Lady Langston's residence in Venice, Italy. He froze. Could it be? Could the bond between Hargrove and Tremaine extend deeper than rivalry? Perhaps the quarrel heard between them was not about art at all, but betrayal? He folded the book gently, then rang for Wilkins. "OUI, mon ami. I need one small detail. On the evening of the soirée, did anyone ask to change rooms? Alter seating arrangements?" The butler hesitated. "Yes, sir. Miss Tremaine requested to move her seat just before dinner. She said the fireplace irritated her eyes." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Did she take a place nearer to Lady Langston?" "Indeed, sir. On the sofa beside her." That evening, Poirot requested all guests remain in the drawing-room. The fire was lit again, casting long amber shadows across the parquet floor. The guests assembled with a growing sense of fatigue, some of it emotional, some of it deeply nervous. Poirot stood before them, hands clasped behind his back. "There is a saying," he began, "that in every great deception, there is one small, careless truth. And that is all the detective requires." He stepped closer to Miss Tremaine. "You requested a seat change before dinner. You placed yourself beside Lady Langston, within reach of her glass." She blinked. "Yes, I wasn't feeling well." "Ah, but you were well enough to perform later. And well enough to argue with Mr. Hargrove in the corridor. About Venice." She stiffened. The others turned sharply to her. "I never mentioned Venice," she said. "Just so," said Poirot. "And yet it is in her diary. J.H., Julian Hargrove, not to be trusted. Remember Venice." Julian's voice cracked. "What are you saying?" Poirot looked at them both. "You were in Venice together. With Lady Langston. A scandal. A failed arrangement. She refused to forgive. And when the opportunity came..." He looked at Tremaine. "She humiliated you publicly. Threatened to cut your funding. That performance was to be your farewell. So you ended her act. Forever." Tremaine rose, pale as parchment. "You have no proof." "I have her diary. And Wilkins' word. And soon, the residue of poison in her evening glove, which you wore briefly after she handed them to you." Gasps followed. Grange stepped forward. Poirot's voice softened. "You made one error, mademoiselle. You underestimated memory. And you underestimated Hercule Poirot." Chapter 6. The Mask Behind the Smile. The arrest of Serena Tremaine had not brought calm to Belgrave Square. Quite the contrary, it stirred a different kind of silence. A tense, repressive stillness. One that settled into the carpets and drapes like a draught no fire could dispel. Poirot, as ever, sensed it. Not the end of a case, but a transition from illusion to discomfort. Lady Langton's name no longer echoed through gossip merely as an aristocrat or a patroness of the arts. Now it was weighted with finality, tethered to crime. And those who remained, Langston, Hargrove, even Miss Grey, moved like shadows through the house, bearing their own measure of guilt, whether deserved or not. Poirot sat once again in the morning room, his fingertips steepled, his thoughts led. Tremaine's arrest had been necessary. The circumstantial evidence aligned. The motive, her proximity to the victim, and the slip regarding Venice, all pointed toward guilt. But in Poirot's mind, there was a phrase he had learned to respect. Too easy. A murder? Yes. An arrest? Yes. But something in the symmetry of it all unsettled him. It was Grange who voiced it first. "You're not satisfied," he said, that afternoon, upon entering the room. Poirot raised his eyes. "None. I am not." "But you had her. Motive, means, opportunity. The works." Poirot leaned back slightly, fingers tapping the arm of the chair. "Oh, and yet, her fear. It did not feel like guilt. It felt like desperation. And that, my friend, is not always the same." Grange gave a weary sigh. "You're suggesting she's innocent." "I suggest only that she is not the whole story. And Poirot does not like unfinished stories." Poirot asked to speak again with Julian Hargrove, who arrived stiffly dressed in a tailored overcoat, a scarf looped too precisely around his neck. His smile was well practiced, but the lines near his eyes had deepened. "I assume this is about Serena?" he asked as he took his seat. "Among other things," Poirot said gently. "You cared for her." Hargrove's expression shifted, a twitch at the corner of his mouth, a flicker of something real. "Yes," he admitted. "In my own way. She was difficult, certainly. Proud. But she had talent. And Lady Langston, she kept her on a leash." "Ah," murmured Poirot. "The Lady Langston. So often she is described not as a person, but as a force. A sculptor of reputations. None." "She destroyed more than she created," Hargrove replied, not without bitterness. "And Venice?" The question struck like a pin to a balloon. Hargrove's eyes flinched, but he recovered quickly. "A misstep. I was there on an Arts Council invitation. Serena followed. Lady Langston didn't approve. She threatened to end your funding. Your career." "Yes." "Did you hate her?" A pause. "I feared her more than I hated her." Next, Poirot asked to see Eleanor Grey. She entered quietly, her posture the same as before, reserved, nearly invisible. Her hands twisted a handkerchief in her lap. "I've already spoken to the police, Monsieur Poirot," she said in a near whisper. "I do not doubt your honesty, mademoiselle," he replied warmly. "I ask only for a few more details. You were with Lady Langston the entire day of the soirée." "Nearly. I helped her dress. Prepared her schedule. She had 3 guests before the event, Hargrove, then Tremaine, then Major Frobisher." "Did she argue with any of them?" Eleanor hesitated. "Not openly. But I heard her raise her voice after Miss Tremaine left. Something about betrayal in plain sight." "Could you say to whom that remark was addressed?" "No. She was alone in the study when I passed. But she looked furious." Poirot's expression sharpened slightly. "Did you ever handle Lady Langston's gloves that evening?" Eleanor blinked. "Yes. Briefly. She dropped them while speaking to the Major. I retrieved them and placed them on her vanity." "You did not wear them?" No, of course not. Poirot nodded. You were fond of her. There was a long silence. I was loyal, even when she made it hard to be. Later that evening, Poirot stood in the grand hallway beneath the curved staircase, alone with his thoughts. He glanced toward the closed salon doors. Somewhere within, Lady Langton's portrait still hung above the fireplace, poised, regal, untouchable. But portraits, Poirot knew, were curated images. The truth often lay beneath the brushstrokes. Wilkins approached quietly. Pardon me, sir. This came for you. He handed over a small envelope, postmarked that morning. No return address. Inside was a folded page, blank, save for a single typed line. The poison was not in the glass. Poirot read it thrice, then slowly refolded the paper. Grange, summoned moments later, frowned. A prank. Or a message, Poirot said. One meant for me. Someone with knowledge of the method. Which means, if they are not the murderer, they are terribly close to them. Could be a bluff. Or a correction. Grange's brow furrowed. You still think the poison wasn't in the champagne? Poirot tapped the note. This person does. Grange groaned. What does that leave? Food? Gloves? Poirot's gaze sharpened. Yes, the gloves. They were handled. Passed. But what if it was something more subtle? He turned abruptly. Come. There is one place we have not searched with sufficient care. They entered Lady Langton's dressing room. Luxurious, gilded, meticulously arranged, as if waiting for her to return. Her jewelry lay in velvet trays, her perfumes in a row of crystal flacons. Poirot's eyes fell on a small glass bottle, half full. He lifted it gently, examining the label. Eau d'Amber Blanche, he read. Her signature scent. He dabbed a trace onto a handkerchief, sniffed, then frowned. Grange leaned over. What is it? Poirot walked to the window, turned the bottle beneath the light. Something is off. Too sharp. Too bitter. She wore this the night of the soirée. Yes. Yes. Overwhelming stuff. Poirot took a tissue, touched the perfume to it, and placed it near the fire. Within seconds, a pungent aroma rose, something acrid, chemical, not floral. Grange recoiled. That's not perfume. Poirot nodded slowly. It is poison, masked as perfume. Applied to her skin, absorbed over hours. A slow-acting agent. Perhaps applied by someone she trusted, someone permitted access to her dressing table. His voice dropped to a whisper. Someone who knew the glass would be a distraction. He turned sharply. Grange, get the lab to test this bottle. Immediately. Back in the hallway, Poirot looked again at the note. The poison was not in the glass. Not a boast. Not a clue. A warning. The murderer had calculated well, framing Tremaine, manipulating assumptions. But now, the mask was slipping. Chapter 7. Shadows Among the Living. It rained the next morning, a fine, whispering drizzle that misted over the iron gates of Belgrave Square and blurred the edges of the world. Poirot, standing by the drawing-room window, watched the droplets trail down the glass in parallel lines, each one delicate, methodical, deliberate. Much like his thoughts. The test on Lady Langton's perfume had confirmed his suspicions. Laced with a rare, slow-absorbing neurotoxin, the fragrance had acted invisibly, seeping through her skin, bypassing the mouth, the stomach, the telltale bitterness of ingestion. It had been murder by intimacy. He had seen such methods before, subtle, precise, lacking drama. Not the work of passion, but of calculation. Of someone who sought not only to kill but to mislead. Grange, looking pale and slightly winded, arrived bearing the lab report. He handed it to Poirot without a word. Poirot did not need to read it again. Instead, he said, "You understand now, mon ami, why Serena Tremaine is not our culprit." Grange exhaled heavily. "You're certain?" She could not have administered this. She had no access to the bottle. And even if she did, there is no motive consistent with this kind of poison. It is too sophisticated for a crime of the heart. But that means someone in the household. Poirot turned from the window. Or someone trusted enough to be left alone in Lady Langton's inner sanctum. A silence passed between them. Then Grange murmured, "The note. Whoever sent it, they knew." Poirot nodded. "Oh, and perhaps they are trying to warn us before it is too late." With the evidence mounting, Poirot requested a second audience with Major Alaric Frobisher. The former military man arrived punctually, his frame upright despite the weight of years on his shoulders. His expression bore the same polished detachment Poirot had observed before, but there was an unease behind the eyes now, an edge of awareness. They sat in the library, a room heavy with naval prints and the scent of leather-bound books. "Major," Poirot began, "you knew Lady Langton a long time." 32 years, Frobisher said. "Longer than her husband did." "You were not lovers?" Frobisher chuckled darkly. "No. Friends. Confidants, in the old-fashioned sense. She trusted me. Told me things she wouldn't tell others." "Did she tell you she was being blackmailed?" Frobisher's smile vanished. Poirot leaned forward. "You see, Major, someone had knowledge of Lady Langton's past. A time in Venice, years ago, before her marriage. A period she took great care to erase. Did she mention it to you?" Frobisher's jaw tightened. "She said only that she had made mistakes. That someone was threatening to expose them. A man." "Did she ever give you a name?" "No." "Did she seem frightened?" "Terribly. And angry. She believed the person was close, too close." Poirot considered this. "Did she ever suspect her husband?" Frobisher shook his head. "No. She thought him weak, not dangerous." Poirot folded his hands. And yet he stood to gain everything. It was time to speak to Lord Langton again. He received Poirot in the study, a brandy already poured at 11 in the morning. He looked worn, the usual patrician elegance hollowed into something less steady. "You have more questions?" he asked, swirling his glass. "I do, but only one of importance." "Which is?" Poirot stepped closer. "Did you know your wife had changed her will a week before her death?" Langton's eyes flickered, then steadied. "No. She revoked her former beneficiaries, Serena Tremaine, the Langton Foundation, even the bequest to Major Frobisher, and left the bulk of her estate to a charity in Trieste. A very obscure charity. One registered under a false name." Langton's hand froze. Poirot's voice lowered. "The name used was Giovanni Castaldi. Does that name mean anything to you?" Langton stood slowly. "Where did you hear that name?" "It appears only once in any record linked to your wife, in a police file from Venice, dated 1909. Langton's brandy sloshed against the glass. "She had a child, didn't she?" Poirot said quietly. "Before she became Lady Langton. Out of wedlock. With this Giovanni Castaldi." Langton sat again, his face grey. "She never spoke of it. Only that she had been ruined. That she paid a price to erase it." Poirot said nothing for a long moment. Then, the truth was coming back. Someone had found it. And that truth was going to cost her everything. Langton looked away. "She was going to leave me. Not just cut me out. Destroy me publicly." "Did you kill her?" The question hung in the air like a suspended blade. "No," Langston said eventually. "But God help me, I thought about it." Poirot turned next to Eleanor Gray. The young woman met him in the garden room, an odd choice on such a damp day, but perhaps she preferred the half-light. She was pale, her eyes bruised with sleeplessness. "You asked about the gloves," she said at once. "I lied." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "I wore them. Once. Briefly. To polish a silver frame on her vanity. I didn't think it mattered." "Madam, with poison, the smallest detail matters." Eleanor bowed her head. "I know." Poirot watched her carefully. "You were with her the longest. You dressed her. You knew her routine." "I admired her," Eleanor whispered. "I wanted to be her." "Wanted to be? Or wanted to replace?" She looked up sharply. "What are you implying?" "That ambition, when mixed with proximity and resentment, can turn lethal." Eleanor's lip trembled. "I didn't kill her." "Perhaps not. But you knew something. You suspected. And you stayed silent." Tears welled in her eyes. She trusted the wrong person. Poirot nodded. "And who was the right one?" But Eleanor said nothing more. That evening, as Poirot sat alone reviewing his notes, Wilkins entered with a package. Brown paper. No markings. Poirot unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a photograph, black and white, slightly faded. A woman, young, unmistakably Lady Langston, standing beside a dark-haired man, Giovanni Castaldi, and beside them, a child, 4 or 5 years old. Gender unclear, but the eyes were striking. On the back, in faded ink, Venice, 1909. Poirot stared at it for a long time. There were no more doubts. Someone in the house had sent this. Someone who knew. He picked up the telephone. "Inspector Grange, we must assemble everyone. Tomorrow morning. The drawing room. 10 o'clock. It is time." "Time for what?" came the voice on the line. Poirot smiled coldly. "To unmask the one who killed Lady Langston. And to find out why the past, even one buried in Venice, never stays buried." Chapter 8. The Face Beneath the Portrait. The drawing room was oppressively silent. 10 o'clock struck with a sonorous clang from the grandfather clock in the hall, and Poirot, ever punctual, stepped into the room like a surgeon entering an operating theatre. He was composed, his grey eyes sharp behind the familiar glint of pince-nez, his moustache meticulously waxed. At his side stood Inspector Grange, whose notepad was ready but whose pen remained uncapped. It was Poirot's stage now. Seated before him were the familiar figures of Belgrave Square: Lord Langston, brooding and dishevelled; Serena Tremaine, veiled in composure; Major Frobisher, arms tightly crossed; Eleanor Gray, pale and trembling; and Wilkins, silent, near the back wall, blending into the wallpaper with the humility of a loyal servant. Above them loomed the grand portrait of Lady Langston, serene, regal, and utterly unknowing of her own violent end. Poirot stood in the centre, his voice low and commanding. "Mesdames et messieurs, thank you for coming. I will not detain you long. For today, I give you what you each came seeking, the truth." No one moved. Serena shifted in her chair, but otherwise the group was still, statues awaiting judgment. Poirot began to pace, slowly. Lady Langston did not die of natural causes. No heart defect. No stroke. She was poisoned by a rare compound that entered her bloodstream through her skin. A compound delivered by perfume. Serena gave a sharp intake of breath. Frobisher muttered a curse. Wilkins looked genuinely shocked. Poirot held up a hand. "Do not feign surprise. The facts are established. But the question that remains, the one that eluded even the most meticulous minds, is why. Why was she killed? What could drive someone to such a precise, cold act? He paused near the fireplace, where a single candlestick glowed dimly beneath the overcast sky. Let us consider the facts. A woman with secrets. A will rewritten in haste. A note, unsigned, warning of danger. And a photograph sent to me by someone in this house. He withdrew the image of Lady Langston, Giovanni Castaldi, and the child. He passed it to Grange, who held it aloft for all to see. A child born in Venice. A child hidden from the world. A secret paid for in shame and silence. But the past, as I have said before, does not remain buried. Someone uncovered the truth. Someone who had waited a very long time. Poirot's gaze swept the room. This was not a crime of greed alone, nor vengeance. It was something more intimate, a reckoning. He walked to the portrait and looked up at it. There is a saying in Belgium, Le passé revient toujours, the past always returns. Sometimes it returns in the form of memory, sometimes in the shape of blood. He turned back to them. Eleanor Gray, he said quietly. The young woman flinched. Her lips parted, but no words came. You are not who you claim to be. Lord Langston sat up. What are you talking about? Poirot approached Eleanor. Your records are forged. I suspected it early, when I could find no mention of your schooling, no relatives, no real past. But the photograph confirmed it. The eyes. The shape of the chin. Poirot laid the image gently on the table. You are the child. The silence shattered like glass. No, Eleanor whispered. No, I. You are Elena Castaldi, born in Venice in 1909. Sent to a convent. Adopted out under another name. But you returned, didn't you? You found her. You entered her home. You stood by her side every day, knowing she had left you. Serena rose to her feet. Is this true? Eleanor stared at Poirot, her face a storm of denial, pain, and something else, fury. She abandoned me, she said, her voice rising. She left me in that place like I didn't exist. I was nothing. While she became Lady Langston, I was made to scrub floors and bow my head and wonder what I had done wrong. Poirot did not interrupt her. I came to find her. I didn't know if I'd hate her or forgive her. But then I saw how she lived, surrounded by art, luxury, love. She had everything. And me? I was a ghost. She did not know where you were, Poirot said gently. She believed the nuns had sent you far away, that she would never see you again. She could have looked harder, Eleanor spat. Poirot took a step closer. So you planned to expose her? I thought of it, but it wouldn't undo anything. So I stayed. I watched. I served. Until I saw the will. And you realized you weren't even in it. Eleanor's eyes burned. She gave it to a man who wasn't even real. Giovanni Castaldi had died in prison. I traced his record. She invented that charity. She wanted to bury me again. Poirot's tone hardened. So you stole her perfume bottle, added the toxin, and waited, knowing it would take hours, knowing no one would suspect the girl who changed her gowns. Eleanor's lower lip quivered. I didn't want to kill her. I wanted her to see me. But she never did. Serena's voice cracked. You could have told us. And be pitied. Eleanor snapped. No. I didn't want to be a charity. I wanted her to choose me because she remembered. Poirot bowed his head. I believe you. But what you did, it cannot be undone. Grange stepped forward. Miss Gray, or should I say, Castaldi, you'll need to come with me. Eleanor did not resist. She looked only at the portrait. She said my eyes reminded her of someone. She didn't know it was herself. As she was led away, Lord Langston said nothing. Major Frobisher wiped his glasses. Serena Tremaine wept quietly into her gloves. Poirot stood alone once more. That night, Poirot returned to his flat in Whitehaven Mansions. The drizzle had turned to steady rain, tapping like gilt on the windows. He sat at his desk, sorting through the final pages of the case. The photograph, the will, the perfume bottle, all now reduced to evidence in a file that would be sealed and archived. A young woman had sought a mother's love and found only a stranger's shadow. Poirot folded his hands and closed his eyes. Justice had been done. But there was no victory. Only the quiet ache of truth. Chapter 9. Echoes from the Portrait Gallery. 2 days had passed since the drawing-room confrontation. London, ever indifferent to tragedy, moved on with its bustle, its bells, and its omnibuses. But inside Whitehaven Mansions, Hercule Poirot remained immersed in quiet reflection. He had spent much of the morning reviewing reports from Inspector Grange. Eleanor, or rather, Elena Castaldi, had confessed to the poisoning with an unsettling calm. The toxic compound she used had been traced to a chemist in Soho, purchased under a false name several weeks before the murder. The bottle of perfume, laced with the fatal agent, had been switched carefully on the evening of the garden reception. Yet, as Poirot leaned back in his green velvet chair, something continued to trouble him, a faint discordant note in the otherwise symmetrical melody of the case. The motive, the means, the opportunity, all had aligned. And yet, he rose, adjusting the cuffs of his dove-grey suit, and turned to the marble fireplace where a telegram from Grange lay atop the mantel. It reported the confirmation of Lady Langston's amended will, leaving everything to the Castaldi Foundation, a non-existent charity traced back to false documentation created by someone with great access and skill. But it had not been Eleanor. Of that, Poirot was now quite sure. He picked up his walking stick and hat. There was still one place he had not visited since the murder. A place full of whispers. A place of portraits. Langston House's portrait gallery stretched along the western wing of the estate. A long corridor lined with gilded frames, oil-slicked glances of ancestors long departed, and that peculiar silence only money could preserve. Poirot stepped lightly across the parquet floor, the soles of his shoes echoing faintly. The household staff, reduced in presence since the scandal, had left the wing mostly undisturbed. Dust had begun to gather on the frames, and the faint scent of camphor and turpentine lingered in the air. Poirot paused before the grand painting of Lord Ambrose Langston, the founder of the estate, a hard-eyed man with a sabre in one hand and a parchment in the other. Next to him, Lady Genevieve Langston, famed for her poison-laced poetry and 9 miscarriages. Portrait after portrait, generation after generation, all looking down upon Poirot as if to challenge his right to walk among them. And then he saw it. A sliver of gilt, out of alignment. The portrait of Lady Langston, the new one, painted only a year before her death, had been moved slightly. Not visibly, not carelessly, but Poirot, trained in symmetry and obsessively observant, saw what others would not. He stepped closer. Behind the frame, a folded envelope had been wedged between the canvas and the wall. Yellowed slightly at the edges, sealed with a red wax stamp, unmarked. He removed it gently and broke the seal. Inside was a letter, handwritten in a script that trembled slightly but remained elegant. Lady Langston's own hand. My dearest Eleanor, if you have found this, it means I have failed you again. I do not know if you came to me to confront, to forgive, or simply to see what became of the woman who bore you. I have waited every day for your face to appear, always wondering if I would recognize you. They told me you had died. The convent claimed you were sent away and perished of fever. I believed it, because it was easier than hope. But when I saw you, I knew in my bones. The eyes, the stillness. I could not speak, not at first. And then I feared what the truth might do to you. I changed the will. I tried to leave it all to you, but I feared the scandal, and so I invented the foundation. A legal fiction for a greater truth. You were never forgotten. Forgive me if you can. A.L. Poirot's fingers tightened slightly around the paper. He closed his eyes. So Eleanor had been wrong, and right. Her mother had recognized her. Had tried, however clumsily, to reach her. But someone else had known of this letter. Someone who had moved the painting, perhaps more than once. And that thought stirred something new within him. He returned to the main hall of Langston House and requested an audience with Serena Tremaine. She received him in the late Lady Langston's music room, a glass of sherry in her hand and an unlit cigarette resting between elegant fingers. "You look as if you've seen a ghost," she said coolly. "Madam," Poirot began, "I have just come from the portrait gallery." She arched a brow. "I avoid that place. Too many memories." Poirot nodded. "Yes, memories and secrets." He took a step closer. "You were close to Lady Langston. You knew about her past. You also knew about the foundation, and that it was not real." Her expression did not change. "What are you implying?" "You forged the paperwork," Poirot said gently. "I've had it confirmed. The dates of incorporation, the signatures, all traced to a typewriter you used in your office upstairs." She let out a long breath, then lit the cigarette with a practiced flick. "I did it for her. She didn't want to face the scandal of naming her illegitimate daughter. She asked me to make it look like a charitable bequest. I thought I was doing her a kindness." Poirot inclined his head. "I believe you. But you must understand, the concealment contributed to her death. Eleanor believed herself erased." "I wanted to tell her," Serena murmured. "But what could I say? That her mother was too afraid to claim her." She looked away, her voice softer now. "I was her friend, yes. But I was also a coward." Poirot stepped back. "It is not for me to judge, madam. But I believe Lady Langston tried, in the end, to make peace. And Eleanor, she sought a truth, not revenge. Had she known her mother remembered, things might have ended differently." The cigarette burned between her fingers. Serena said nothing. Poirot turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "There is one last thing," he said. "The letter. I found it behind the portrait. Someone moved it recently." Her silence deepened. Poirot gave her a long, measured look. "You knew Eleanor would come eventually. That she might find it." He let the thought linger, then stepped into the corridor and disappeared into the hush of Langston House. That evening, Poirot dined alone. The rain had ceased, and in its place came the quiet of resolution, not contentment, but something gentler than grief. He had solved the mystery of the Gilded Salon. The killer had been unmasked, but it was the reason, not the revelation, that lingered with him. In the end, murder had not sprung from hatred, but from a daughter's longing, and a mother's silence. Chapter 10. The Little Grey Cells. The drawing-room at Whitehaven Mansions was silent but for the ticking of a small ormolu clock on the mantel. Outside, the London dusk settled with a golden haze, and inside, Hercule Poirot sat upright in his armchair, hands steepled, eyes fixed upon the fire that flickered in measured rhythm. The case, though seemingly closed, still pulsed with unanswered questions. Eleanor Castaldi's confession, the forged foundation, the letter concealed behind the portrait. They were threads in a tapestry not yet fully unrolled. He had summoned them all, Eleanor, Serena Tremaine, Rupert Langston, and Inspector Grange, to sit once more before him. It was a scene echoing the tradition Poirot had long perfected, the final reckoning. Only now, it was not for theatrics. It was to resolve the quiet contradictions that had continued to whisper to him through the days. As the clock struck 6, they arrived, one by one, tension hanging like a storm cloud in the air. Serena, pale and drawn. Rupert, ever agitated. Eleanor, gaunt but composed. Grange, notepad in hand, though he had learned by now that Poirot seldom needed a second voice. "Miss Amos," Poirot began, folding his hands upon his lap. "Thank you for coming. I believe we stand at the edge of truth, the entire truth." He looked toward Eleanor. "You confessed, Mademoiselle Castaldi. And yet, your confession left gaps, subtle ones. You claimed to have placed the poisoned perfume bottle in your mother's room the evening of the reception. But I have reviewed the timetable, and there is a detail you overlooked." She frowned. "What detail?" Poirot raised a hand gently. "You were never alone in the West Wing. In fact, your alibi, as noted by one of the footmen, places you with Serena Tremaine in the solarium from 8 to 9. The opportunity, as you described it, did not exist." There was a silence. Eleanor blinked once, slowly. Then her voice came low. "But I was certain. I must have." "No, mademoiselle," Poirot interrupted softly. "You believed you had done it. Driven by rage, by grief, by the burden of abandonment, yes. But belief and truth, they are not always companions." Inspector Grange leaned forward. "But the confession?" "Constructed from guilt," Poirot said. "Not knowledge." He turned now to Rupert Langston. "Monsieur, your conduct throughout this affair has been erratic, no?" Rupert bristled. "What are you implying?" "I am implying that your mother's death was, to you, not a tragedy but an opportunity. Her fortune, her shares, her holdings, all would have passed to you, had she not amended the will. But she did." Rupert's jaw tightened. That was before she knew Eleanor was her daughter. Was it? Poirot's voice was quiet. Or did she already know, and sought to make restitution discreetly? He let that settle before continuing. "You discovered the forged foundation documents. You confronted Serena, perhaps even blackmailed her. You knew that if Lady Langston's intent became public, the inheritance would vanish from your reach." "I never." Poirot held up a hand. "No, I do not believe you were the killer, monsieur. Your temperament is impulsive, but not cunning." He shifted his gaze now to Serena. "Madame Tremaine," he said, "it is to you we must now turn." Her fingers tightened on the arm of the chair. "I did nothing wrong." "You did much wrong," Poirot replied, his voice sharpened now. "You forged the foundation. You concealed the letter. You allowed Eleanor to believe her mother had abandoned her twice. You facilitated a lie, and then, when Lady Langston planned to correct it, you panicked." Serena stood up. "No. I loved her. I protected her. She was going to ruin herself, expose everything. I begged her to reconsider." Poirot stood as well, his voice cold as steel. "And when she would not, you ensured she could say nothing more." A gasp rose from Eleanor. "I found your gloves in the ash bin behind the conservatory," Poirot continued. "They reeked faintly of almond, cyanide. Not Eleanor's perfume vial. Yours. You had access to the dressing table, knowledge of the schedule, and above all, motive. Not financial, but personal. You could not bear to see her legacy tainted by scandal." "You saw it as mercy," Poirot interrupted again. "An act of preservation. She trusted you implicitly. You betrayed her in the name of love. Serena Tremaine's shoulders slumped. The truth, long hidden, long fermenting, had finally risen like gas from a sealed chamber. Her silence stretched, her face pale and flickering in the firelight. I wanted to stop her, she said quietly. She had rewritten the will. She planned to tell Eleanor the truth after the reception. She thought it would heal them both, but it would have destroyed the Langston name. Everything she built, gone in a scandal. Poirot bowed his head gently. You decided, as so many murderers do, that your judgment was superior to the truth. Grange moved toward her. Serena Tremaine, I must ask you to. No, she said, turning to him with calm resolve. No need, Inspector. I'll come quietly. She looked at Eleanor one last time. I'm sorry. I truly am. And then she left the room with Grange at her side, the door closing behind them with the softest click, like the last page of a book. Poirot did not speak. Not immediately. He remained standing, his fingers brushing the tips of his mustache. Eleanor turned to him, voice breaking. I didn't do it. But I still wanted her gone. Poirot nodded gently. Thoughts are not crimes, mademoiselle. But they are powerful. They shape action. And in this house, so many thoughts remained unspoken until it was too late. She sat down, suddenly exhausted. What now? Now, Poirot said, you inherit nothing. The will is void, the foundation fraudulent. But you possess something far more valuable. She looked up, incredulous. What could that possibly be? He smiled faintly. The truth. You are no longer a shadow. You are known, seen, loved, even if that love was flawed and too late. He retrieved Lady Langston's letter from the table and handed it to her. For you. As Eleanor unfolded the paper and began to read, Poirot stepped back, letting the firelight cast its warmth against the tears that slipped down her cheeks. In the silence that followed, Poirot finally allowed himself to sit. There were no ovations, no headlines, only the quiet settling of justice, imperfect, perhaps, but whole. As the sky outside faded to twilight and the world went on turning, Hercule Poirot closed his eyes and let the little grey cells rest. And so, another curtain falls, not just on a murder, but on the tangled hearts behind it. In the gilded glow of high society, it was not poison that killed, but pride, secrets, and a loyalty that went too far. Monsieur Poirot, with his order and logic, has once again peeled back the layers to reveal the human truth beneath the lies. If this mystery stirred your little grey cells, do consider subscribing, sharing your thoughts in the comments, and joining us for the next case. There are always more secrets waiting in the shadows. Like the video, share it with mystery lovers, and subscribe to Moonlight Audiobook. Until then, goodbye.